last time we looked at kind of how to do the writing or how to position yourself. And today we want to go a little bit deeper into how to do that. So Abby, we are so grateful that you're willing to share your time and your expertise with us. We are having our virtual summit next week. And one of the things that we will be doing is to look at how we can be more sustainable. We have a goal for each of our partners to increase diversify their income stream, to become more sustainable so that we can also continue to invite more denominations and more partners to get engaged in this work. So the timing of this all works well, and we are looking forward to seeing what God might do in and through us as we begin to examine this area. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Abby, to lead and to question, comment on any thoughts you've had since the last time, but also reminder for everybody, if you have questions or comments yourself, please put it in the chat. I will be watching those, and we will have time at the end. But in the meantime, if there are some questions that we need to address during, I will interrupt Abby to pose those questions as we see fit. So thank you so much. Actually, let me open us with a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it over to you, Abby. Father, thank you for the gift of the internet. What a gift it is for us to gather together so frequently to hear and to learn, to position ourselves, to grow in our capacity. We thank you for the gift of the fellowship of each other, but also of you being present with us, the Holy Spirit, as we seek to build your church, as we seek to build capacity to reach the church for you. Father, we know that you are able to help us, to encourage us, to equip us, to enable us to do more work even than what we think we can do. And so we thank you for this opportunity. Please guide and lead us that we may be faithful with our time, treasure, and talent to glorify you in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you.
Yes,
Over to
it
you,
is
Abby. The
such
rest
a
of us
joy
can.
to be back with you.
Thank you. Go ahead. I'm going to
Yeah.
mute those of us who are not talking.
You bet. Sounds good. All right. Yes, I'm so excited to be back with you all today virtually. We have a lot to go through, so hopefully we can get through everything and leave some time at the end for your questions, but we'll pause throughout. So definitely, as Renita said, please go ahead and put any questions, comments that arise into the chat box. And yeah, we're going to cover our homework. We're going to talk more in depth about the actual application itself and how you fill out and provide appropriate information, some tips and tricks that we'll talk about as well. And we've got a couple notes at the end about time management and relationships, two things that are very important in the grant writing process. So let's go ahead and get started with some conversation about our homework that we had from last time. So I think all of these questions were already shared with you, but we're just going to chat about them briefly. You can either put responses in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, maybe Renita, I'll let you manage any hand raising that happens, since I can't quite see it while I'm sharing my screen. But are there any questions from an application that you were able to find or look at that you weren't sure how to answer? Maybe it was worded in a way you weren't sure what they were asking for, or maybe they were asking for information you've never had to think about. Any questions that you saw on applications that were a bit confusing? I can give a quick example of something that I've seen in applications that can be challenging, is that sometimes it can feel like multiple questions are asking very similar things. So maybe they're asking, what's the purpose of your organization? And then they're also asking, what are your objectives for this program? And it can feel like, okay, well, that's pretty much the same thing, right? And it can be tempting to maybe copy and paste our answers, or not elaborate a whole lot because we feel like we've already answered the question. That can be a little tricky. And so we really want to make sure that we're getting specific about what each question is really trying to get at, and try to understand what the funder is, how they're trying to fill out the whole picture of who we are. So that's one example that I can think of that maybe is a little bit different from things that we would have encountered before in fundraising in general. But any other questions?
But I would add to that too, Abby, that sometimes we might have to Google the word, like what is the difference between
Yes.
purpose or objective or activities? They have
Yeah.
very specific things that they're looking for, and sometimes, especially if English is not the first language, we might not catch the differentiation that needs to be done for that. So Google, you can always just do a
Yes.
quick search on what exactly are they looking for in that.
That's a great example, Renita. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into our next question. Is there any information requested that you're not confident you could provide? So one of the ways that I've seen this show up is an organization, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but a funder might ask you for maybe a policy, a written policy that you've never created for your organization. It doesn't necessarily mean that your organization isn't doing those things. So if it comes to financial management, or how would you handle, like maybe they're asking if you have a grants management policy. If you've never received a grant before, pretty unlikely that you're going to have a written policy about it. But you can probably figure out, based on how you manage your other finances or other gifts, how you would do that. However, you don't have it right now, right? Like you don't have that filed away that you could pull out. So that might trip you up or make you feel like, oh, can I even apply for this? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But is there any information that anyone came across that you weren't confident you could actually submit?
While we're waiting for a hand to go up or somebody to write something in the chat, let me just acknowledge that if there may be, I don't know, I just have a hunch that maybe some people didn't do the homework. I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong about that. Um, but
Yeah,
here's the thing, if you didn't do your homework, it's quite possible. Like what I find is that the tyranny of the urgent, we talk about that sometimes, right? That the urgent is what gets done, and what's not urgent gets put to the side. And writing a grant or doing homework for something like this doesn't feel urgent. So my recommendation for you is that you put something in your calendar that is regarding grant writing. Like I've got Abby who holds me accountable for stuff. There's stuff that needs to get done, and she makes sure that I can get it done if I need to, or she's helping with doing it. You need to put it in your calendar if you're the one to do it, and say, on this day for 2 hours a week, I will only look for grants and write grants, and that's the urgent. It doesn't matter what crisis is going on. So if you didn't do the homework, you need to kind of examine why that is, and just recognize that grants will not drop in your lap. It is work. It is a lot better, it's faster work than individual donors, or, trying to get a small amount of money here or there. It can be more money, but it still has a dedication of time to it. So, um, thank you, Apostle Emmanuel, if you didn't do the homework. I know that's a challenge. So just owning that and recognizing the barriers that we face. This is not just an exercise we're going to for the sake of an exercise, but to actually have some outcomes ourselves in terms of funding the work that God is calling us to do.
Thank you, Renita. Um, our final question that was about who else might need to be involved in completing the application. So we'll talk a little bit about this. Actually, this is a good segue into our next aspect of the presentation. But as Renita was mentioning, the idea behind let's go ahead and just find an application and read through it really is to understand that I can say as much as I want in a presentation like this, but until you're actually in an application and starting to read through it, I don't think it's going to really stick. What you're going to be asked, how you need to think about your organization differently, how you might need to talk about your organization differently, who you might need to talk with within your organization to really tackle this effectively. You're not really going to know that until you're doing an application itself. And even if the first time you pull up an application, you don't end up submitting it for whatever reason, until it becomes practical, I think this is true for most learning, it's not gonna stick. It's not gonna really be meaningful, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's dive into some of the things that I think are really important to think about a little bit in advance, even before you sit down to write. And as leaders within your organization, a lot of this you might already know, but if you are bringing somebody else in, whether that's someone else on your team or maybe someone new entirely, these are things that they are going to need to know. You have to have pretty specific and in-depth understanding of your organization to be able to fill out an application for a grant. So some of the things that you're going to want to think about and make sure you have a good understanding of are really why your organization exists at all. This can be communicated through your mission, your vision, the history of your organization, how you evolved, and your purpose, your organizational purpose. So all of those things can speak to your why. Why does your organization exist? You're also going to want to think about your what and your how. So what programs your organization is operating, why they're existing the way that they are, what activities they include, and then how you know if they are working. That's really important to understand. And this is actually where I find, especially for those of us that are in more administrative roles, or I know a lot of you are still very much in the work that you're doing, but if you are at all removed, if you have, program staff underneath you that are doing the work day to day, this is where we might need to have some of those, collaborative conversations and say, okay, but how does that work? How many people are involved in this? How long does this program take? All of those kinds of things might be a good opportunity to sit down with people if you haven't had that conversation recently about what are the specific activities and how do they all work together. Also, you need to have a good understanding of the resources that are available to you. So this is where your budget will come in. Understanding who your staff is, if you have a board of directors, who they are, what they do, what they bring to your organization, your different revenue streams that are at play. So that speaks to sustainability a little bit, as Renita mentioned earlier. And then also the financial logic of your organization. So what I mean by that is, how do you know that you have the resource? How are you thinking about the resources that you're bringing in and how they're getting expended? All of these are things that someone in your organization needs to know to be able to submit a complete grant application. Renita, do you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah. So one thing to think through is that normally foundations don't want to fund 100% of your project or 100% of
Yes.
your organization. They will ask for who else is funding it, because if you don't have any other funding streams, they don't want to become that you become dependent on them. So when Abby's saying financial logic, she wants, where are your funding streams before you go to somebody? And again, you probably don't want to ask for more than 10% of what it is that you're trying to do. Again, it's going to depend on the organization maybe and the foundation, but typically that's something that that they want to look at. I'm just saying, Pastor Nicholas, you're asking for the font size. I'm going to turn the captions off. I thought it might be helpful, but that might be making the font smaller.
Sure.
So, okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. And some of our later slides are a little less crowded, so hopefully that will help too. Finally, before you start writing or as you're thinking about really pursuing grants, definitely think about a little bit of the logistical aspect of how this will impact your organization. So, including everything that we discussed in our last session about organizational capacity and reporting and all of that, think about who on your team is going to be responsible for writing and submitting the application. Are they able to keep track of the deadlines? Do they have too much on their plate already? And maybe they need to be, some of their responsibilities need to be delegated elsewhere so that they do have time to focus on this. As Renita was mentioning about time, yes, grant applications, you're often, there might be one deadline and maybe it's a few months away. If it's a few months away, there's a really good chance that you're not going to be as on top of it as you want to be or you think you will, because there are so many other things that can come up. And those are the things that are urgent, require immediate response. It's really easy to push these things down the road. So making sure that whoever is responsible for writing and submitting applications on your behalf knows this is something that we need to plan for, and there needs to be dedicated time saved for it. And I'll talk a little bit more about time management later on. But this is a really good time to check in and think about, okay, who's actually going to own this? Even if they aren't doing all of the writing, who's going to think about keeping track of these things. Okay. Next, a quick note about what to have on hand. Oop, my presentation's jumping ahead of me. You will receive a list of documents that I recommend collecting as you prepare to submit grant applications after this session. So I'm not going to go through that comprehensive list now, but kind of think about these in two different categories. So first of all, you might be asked for internal documentation, which is considered standard for kind of strategic ongoing operations, proof that your organization is thinking things through and isn't just responding to needs as they come in, and but that you actually have some kind of thought process behind what you're doing. So this might look like program and organizational budgets, strategic planning documentation, an organizational chart, things like that that just prove to an external party what's happening internally. Okay. And then there are often documents requested that really just demonstrate your credibility and your trustworthiness. So this might be documents that show your financial health of your organization. So that in the US, that's often, tax documentation that we're required to submit annually. It could be proof of board oversight. So it could be board minutes or board bylaws. Or it could be annual or impact reports that are demonstrating your evaluation capacity. If you have a funder, a lot of funders in the grant space really care about metrics and evaluation. And so anything that can demonstrate your ability to do that and kind of a history of that is often attractive. And then you're often also asked here for your proof of status as a nonprofit organization, whatever that looks like in your particular location. In general, just a quick note on attachments. If they are requested, you do want to provide them. So if you are submitting an application and you're missing attachments, that's an incomplete application. And then also you are often given like the option to add documentation that maybe they're not going to tell you specifically what you have to provide. But in that case, you want to think about, is there anything from that I wasn't able to share in the application that I think is important to know? This could be a story, maybe a newsletter you have. I know that you're all submitting newsletters. throughout the year. And so if you have a newsletter maybe that really captures the story of your organization or the impact that you have, that could be a great place to just submit something if you're able to offer something optionally. Okay, this is a good spot to pause for questions. So do we have any questions, Renita, that we should cover from the chat box?
No, not questions. We're just chatting
Okay,
about
just some
how,
chatting.
using,
Great.
yeah. I mean, using Salesforce is what I'm encouraging them. The metrics that you put on Salesforce, you can put pictures there, you can put stories there. It will help you be organized. Anytime a grant opportunity comes, you can just go to Salesforce and pull out that stuff. It's a tool that will help you be organized for when you need to be. And just one thing, there's not very many, but there are sometimes we've had a grant opportunity will open at like 9 a.m. and they will only take the first, 100 or 300 applications. And what was it, Abby? Like within 10 minutes, it was closed. I mean, you have to be
Yeah.
ready to go. You have to have stuff ready. So getting these documents together, getting your history, what you do, why you do it, having a folder on your laptop that has all that stuff will really help you. And when you put that time in your calendar to work on it, it's going to help you be more successful when the opportunities come.
Yes. Thank you for closing that loop in my head for me. Renita, that when you get this list of recommended documents after our session, I really, really strongly recommend that you save all of those documents in a single spot. You might also need to save them other places. That's fine, but have a grant writing folder where you're saving all of that information so that, just like Renita said, it's handy to you. It'll save you time later on, even if you're not having to do a grant application under the wire quite like that. It just saves you time to not have to go tracking these things down every single time you're submitting an application. It's a really good practice. Okay. Let's keep moving because boy, does time get away from us. So a couple things to keep in mind as you are writing. First of all, you want to remember your audience. So we talked about this quite a bit last time, but you want to think about the specific funder and their goals, and then what is the actual application that is in front of you. You are not, this isn't about misrepresenting your work, but it does mean that you might focus on certain aspects of what you do over other aspects because of what that funder cares about, as opposed to other funders. So you just want to remember who you're writing to, and then hand in hand with that, you want to be really precise about answering the questions that you are asked. You have your audience's attention for a really limited time. So you want to make sure that you are giving them the information that they are looking for to really understand whether or not your program is in alignment with theirs. So we don't want to muddy the waters by providing information that is important to us, but not to them. And I say that as someone that has been in a nonprofit, and I know that we hold our programs very dear. These are programs and work that we've poured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and prayer into. So it can be really tempting to say but you don't understand everything that we're doing. They don't need to. They need to understand the part that they are most in alignment with, okay? This is also a reminder to myself because I struggle with it sometimes. We also want to avoid jargon. So we want to make sure that someone who is unfamiliar with our organization can understand the work that we're describing. Again, when we are in the day-to-day of our organization, there's shorthand, there's language that we get used to using within our organization that might not translate to other people. And especially if you're writing cross-culturally to to a funder that maybe has a different cultural foundation than yours, you just simplify the language. It's okay to use very simple, clear language in grant writing. We also want to be bold. So what I mean by that is we want to be clear about what the need is. We know that funders again, like Renita said, a lot of funders don't want to fund an entire program, an entire organization. They want to be part of a bigger story. But and you want to ask them within the bounds of what they're likely to fund. So if someone is saying, we're looking for projects to fund between where we're going to give a gift between 5,000 and 20,000 US dollars. Don't then submit an application for 50,000 US dollars. But when you are describing the need of your organization, when you're saying this is our budget, when you're explaining everything that goes into your program, don't hold back because they're saying that they are only going to fund up to 20,000. And why I say that is that a funder is never going to fund a program that they don't think needs their help. If they don't feel like their gift would make a difference, then what is the point of making that gift? But also, we'll get into this with relationships later on, but you're opening the door for future partnership, for expanded partnership beyond what you're asking. There is no reason for them to give above and beyond what you ask. There's no reason for them to stick with you over time if they think that they've met your needs and you're good to go. Okay. So we do want to be very clear about the needs of our organization as we are writing. Um, let's keep moving if we can. There we go. Uh-oh. Hopefully this is still working. So what to about the process? Oh, there you are. Okay, we're back. First of all, there are likely to be multiple steps. This isn't true for every funder, but it is quite common for there to be a request for what is called a letter of intent or a letter of interest. And that comes before you're invited to submit a full application. So just be prepared. We talked about this last time, that grant funding is unlikely to meet incredibly urgent needs. Oops. Sorry about that. So just remember, there might be multiple steps and you want to complete them. If you submit a letter of intent or a letter of interest to an organization and they come back to you and say, we're inviting you to submit a full application. Here's the application. It is due by this time. Follow those instructions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to fund you, unfortunately. It's just the next step in the process. But you're not going to get the funding if you don't do the next step, even if you got invited to it. Also, again, we're going to talk about time management more, but it does take time to complete an application and get a response from a potential funder. So don't wait until the application is due to finally get around to reading the full application. You want to make sure that you're budgeting your time accordingly, okay? And then deadlines are so important in grant writing. We'll talk more about that. Finally, your proposal is being, not finally, but your proposal is being considered in the context of others, okay? So what I mean by that is you are not the only one completing an application for that funder. Funders are, if you get a no from a funder, which Renita and I can tell you does happen quite frequently. But if you get a no, it doesn't necessarily mean that the funder didn't appreciate your application or doesn't think that your work is aligned with theirs. It might mean that somebody else's work is even more aligned with theirs than yours is. So just keep that in mind. As you go through this process, there are a lot of no's, and maybe more than, our normal fundraising activities. So I just like to remind people of that. Also, each application and funder is unique. So I will be sending out what I call kind of a grant template. These are common questions that you're going to see as you go through the application process. There are a lot of consistencies between applications, a lot of questions that come up frequently. However, I think Renita could tell you this as well. Sitting down ahead of time, doing all the preparation that I really do recommend because it is fruitful. Doesn't mean that you're just going to be able to copy and paste and be done. You're never going to have to tweak it. Oh, there are questions that weren't included on the template. Yeah, that's going to happen. Each application and funder, they are unique. And so you just need to be prepared that even having all of your ducks in a row ahead of time, doing all of this work ahead of time that I really do recommend, doesn't mean that you aren't going to have to actually do grant writing work later on. This will still take time because of the uniqueness of each particular application and funding and funder. So you are always going to have to tailor whatever you prepare to your specific audience. Okay, so good time to pause for questions. Anything that is feeling too overwhelming at the moment?
I'm not seeing
Hold
any
on,
in the
try.
chat. So
Okay.
I think we can, if I don't see hands pop up, I think we can keep going and then do more Q&A at the end.
Sounds good. So I've been harping on it a lot so far, but time management is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important for grants. First of all, accessing and submitting and completing and following up on applications is very time consuming. Also, funders are fielding a lot of questions and they're supporting their existing as well as potential new partners. So you want to make sure that you've accessed and read an entire application well before the deadline in case you have questions or you run into technical issues. It is not uncommon for applications or for funders to use different what are called portals where you're having to log in, you have to create an account, and you have to fill out maybe some initial like screening information so that they know whether or not you're even eligible for their funds. So you want to do all of that well in advance of any deadline that's provided, because if maybe you're needing to set up an account and they have to email you a confirmation that your account has been set up. You don't want to be doing that knowing that you've got 24 hours before the application is due, right? So do all of that well in advance, and then you have time to reach out to them if something comes up. If you're not clear on what a specific question is asking, most funders will provide some contact information if you run into issues like that for someone that can answer questions. Okay. But you're not going to be able to take advantage of that if you're accessing and reading these applications at the last minute. Also, there can be a really steep learning curve here. So give yourself grace as you are learning. It is a new skill set typically to write in this style. It's not going to be the same as writing a newsletter, writing an email, writing an update to an individual funder. It's an entirely new experience. So if you've never done it before or you haven't written like this before, give yourself grace and time to develop this new muscle. It does get easier over time. It does take less time the more applications you fill out. But at the beginning, it will definitely be a little, it'll just take more time. Also, you want to budget time to collaborate with your team. So like I mentioned, you might need to discuss details of your program that you're not as familiar with your other team members. You might be posed questions about your work that you're not used to answering, that you've never had to think through before in specific detail. And so I really strongly encourage you to not go through that process alone. If you do have colleagues that you can discuss this with, make sure to budget time so that you're able to collaborate with your team, so that you can really make your application as strong as possible. I also really recommend, if possible, to submit even before the deadline. So as soon as you have a complete application, you've reviewed it, you've talked to your team members appropriately, you've submitted or you've compiled all of the attachments that are requested. If you're done early, go ahead and submit it. This really can help with if there's a time zone difference, which I know that a lot of us are dealing with, if there's a time zone difference, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that, right? If the application is due at 5 p.m. Pacific, that's a different time than 5 p.m. Eastern, okay? So typically what a funder is going to say, if you reach out and you say, hey, I had a full application, but I didn't get it in on time, they're going to say, sorry, we got enough applications and yours doesn't get to be a part of it. So it really is important to stay on top of those deadlines and to get things submitted in advance if possible, because that really, it can avoid a lot of heartache. Okay. I also want to touch briefly on the importance of relationships. So my computer is having quite the Wednesday. It thinks it's Monday, I think. So the role of relationships. I really see a strong relationship with a funder as key to an ongoing partnership with them. There are open applications everywhere. So you are likely not going to have an existing relationship with every funder that you're reaching out to. But if you do receive funding, really invest in that relationship, because the most successful ongoing opportunities where, okay, we gave you money this year, you used it well, we want to give you more next year, that's going to be partnered with a strong relationship with your funder. Okay, so these relationships are also so crucial to weathering any challenges that arise if your program is having to shift due to something outside of your control. Also maximizing any financial opportunities. I remember when COVID hit the US and all of our nonprofit organizations were suddenly dealing with something they really hadn't dealt with at that particular scale in quite a long time. And there was kind of this crisis here in the Grand Rapids nonprofit community of everyone was being told they needed to stay home, but we knew that we had families that were in need of support to continue accessing education, to access food, all of those kinds of things. It was grant funders here in Grand Rapids that were the ones that could immediately reach out to their existing partners and say, what do you need in terms of funding? That comes from strong relationships of trust where funders know that organizations are the ones, nonprofits are the ones that are on the ground, they have the relationships, they know the needs, and they can mobilize resources quickly, right? So don't overlook your institutional partners because you submit an application to them as opposed to make a phone call like you do with an individual donor. So just do nurture those relationships as they come, is my note there. And then also the grant process can kind of trick you into forgetting that there are people on the other end of it. It can feel very mechanical to go on a website, fill out some information and hit a submit button, but there are people on the other end of it. There are people that are reading those applications, that are making decisions about how money that they are entrusted with is used. And so don't forget to talk about your organization from the lens of, oh, there's going to be another person who's reading this and trying to understand it. Okay. So I think that's everything I really wanted to cover in terms of relationships. So believe it or not, that takes us to our Q&A, but I did want to start. Is Ellie here on the call today? Because I did have a question of his from last session that I wanted to make sure I answered in this one. But either way, his question I'm going to use to kick off our Q&A. So if you have questions about anything that I discussed, go ahead and work on getting those in the chat box for now. But Ellie's question was, what is the best, and I remember this was all capitalized, best strategy for mobilizing funds for administrative expenses? And I would say And Renita, you can hop in here as well. But I would say there's not actually a single best way to cover administrative costs because it will depend a little bit on your revenue streams. But here's a few things that I've seen work well. So first of all, just from more of like an organizational admin perspective, do your best to cover these expenses with your most flexible revenue streams. So anything that doesn't have any restrictions tied to it. That's more like a budgeting principle and kind of yeah, just a high level decision making piece. That comes down to your financial logic a little bit. So yeah, just making sure that your most flexible revenue streams are able to cover the things that are hardest for you to fund in other ways. But also, we talked last time a little bit about making sure that you are including administrative costs in your grant applications if that is allowable. And it often is. Sometimes it's capped at like a 10%. But make sure that if that is allowable by the granting organization to include whatever the maximum is that they allow. If they don't give you any guidance around that, I recommend just go ahead and include a 10% administrative cost in your budget. Unless they are explicitly saying they won't fund it. As we discussed last time as well, consider what administrative costs actually are programmatic. So especially when it comes to like an ED's time, an executive director, or any kind of director level person, if they make sure that their time is accounted for within your whatever program they're overseeing, with the understanding that it should be reflective of the actual time that they're dedicating to that program. So if they're spending 30% of their time overseeing that program, providing guidance for staff, making sure that data is collected and stored appropriately, that should be in your program budget for that program. Okay. And then finally, my last recommendation there would be prioritize pursuing grant opportunities that are for general operations, or make sure to include those administrative costs over the grant opportunities that are more restrictive. Again, we're all trying to decide, how do we maximize our opportunities? How do we go after the things that will really bear the most fruit? This is an opportunity to say no to something that maybe isn't going to serve your organization as effectively in exchange for something that really is going to serve you well. That doesn't mean that if you don't have any opportunities and there is a more restrictive opportunity on the table, you shouldn't take that. But if you're trying to weigh your options between two opportunities, I would always prioritize whatever is going to give you the most flexibility. Anything that I can answer? I know if you haven't written grants, some of this is probably feeling a little bit abstract, and hopefully the handouts that I send after this will be of service to you, and we'll kind of make this all come together. Oh, good. We have a hand.
And then also, before we take Dr. Gaga's question, can you just tell us again what you are sending after? What are the handouts that you're?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so after this session, you'll receive a handout that has some resources for finding grants and for ongoing learning opportunities. So if you want to go a little bit deeper than we can do in an hour on how to prepare a proposal, what to submit with it, there's some links in there for that. But then you will also receive a grant template that I have put together that has a lot of common questions. And I do recommend taking time to fill that out, to prepare something, to have it available to you, and then to update that annually. So it's not a static thing. It is something that I really recommend continuing to use moving forward. And then there will be also a PDF that has a list of recommended, I call them recommended assets, but basically attachments that you are most likely to be asked to submit alongside of your application. And then we'll also be sending out 1 or 2 examples of what are called letters of intent or letters of interest. It doesn't, they're the same thing essentially, but it just depends on what the funder calls them. But these are samples. It can be helpful to have a draft written for yourself in advance. I often find that those are they're asking for more specific things. And so it might not serve you as well to do a lot of that work in advance as opposed to, finding an opportunity where they're asking you specifically and then you can start to practice it that way. But I think it can be helpful to just see something first before you're asked, so that you can reference that if you're ever filling one out. So those will all be sent after this session. I think that's 4 or 5 different attachments for you to look at.
That's great. And one question was asked, are you available to help people with writing grants? That was one question in the chat.
Great question. I'm going to go ahead. We'll still do Q&A, but I will move this forward just a little bit so you all can see my email address here. I am available. I am happy to meet with any of you for up to an hour a single time. This is my work. So you are welcome to chat with me as part of that conversation about what it would look like for us to work together. But this is my business. So unfortunately, I can't be like 100% available to you at all times for reviewing any applications moving forward. But if you would like to, before you submit your first application or you're trying to figure out how to evaluate specific opportunities, I'm happy to meet with any of you once for up to an hour. And you can reach out to me at my email here. And yeah, I'm happy to make myself available in that way for a single
And the other
time.
way that Abby is serving us is as she's looking for grants, and we've done this a few times already on WhatsApp, when we find grant opportunities, we will post those there, and then you can see whether it fits you
Yes.
and go forward with that. All right, Dr. Gaga, you had your hand up first, and then after that, Apostle Emmanuel.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was going to actually ask about how we can get the grants. So that was my first question, but it has been answered. We appreciate your support and sending those documents. But then the second question is, in preparation for application to apply for grants, like what should we do? Like if we have an organization, does our audit report count? Is this something we need to check our financial inflow and outflow? Is that something they look at? Now, talk about the organization. If we have a website, if we don't have a website, are those things counting? How do our genuity, like every donor will want to find out if this organization is actually real, if it's or if it's a fake one. So our registration and other things. So what other administrative, financial, and social media readiness do we need that can speak for us in accessing grant? That's really my question.
That's a great question. It's definitely not going to be, I guess, universal. And I wouldn't say hold off on pursuing grants just because you don't have social media or something like that. However, it is very common for a grant application to say, how are all of the other times that, or all of the other places that we could find information about you. And so it does serve you to have a website if you've been through an audit to make sure that you have those documents available to you. I guess I'm struggling to fully answer it is none of those things hurt, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to wait until you have everything possible to do something. And I think honestly, the best way you'll figure out what you're missing or what you don't have is to work on a single application, to find one and start thinking about whether or not you could fulfill it. And I'm seeing Renita is also putting in the chat, all of your work with DML, everything that you're required to submit to DML is a really good way to figure out whether or not you're ready. And if you are able to submit Salesforce data, if you're able to complete any reports that you're asked for, if you're doing your newsletters on time, all of that will help you know if this is a good opportunity for you, or if you're ready.
Okay,
All right,
Apostle
thank
Emmanuel,
you.
you're next, and then Edward after Emmanuel. I think we're dragging a
so
little bit with the videos on. Go ahead.
Edward or Pastor Emmanuel first?
I see Apostle Emmanuel. Go ahead, Apostle
Okay.
Emmanuel, are you there?
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you, Abby. Sorry I was late, but I just want to know, in your file you send us, will we see the foundations or organizations that can fund our projects?
Yes, that is
Okay.
part of what will be included in there. Yeah,
Okay.
is some tools. There are some that I've already found, and then there are some tools for looking for additional opportunities in there as well.
Okay, thank you. Second
Mhm.
question, is there any possibility that you help to secure the fund and you put it as a fees of expenses that we can pay to you as a service
Good.
you do to us? It is also
That's a
possible
good question.
since it is your business, so you can work with us so that you secure
Yeah,
the fund and we put everything as administrative fees and you'll be paid through the project.
that is a great question. It can be tricky, I guess is the easiest way to answer that. The way to pay a grant writer, typically a foundation or a grant application is not going to pay for you to pay for a grant writer.
Okay.
However, yeah, there are some ways to do it, but I would say I would steer away from trying to do that unless it is specifically a grant application around building your organizational capacity and paying for administrative support. And there are opportunities out there for that, but you're going to want to look at, I would use phrases like nonprofit technical assistance or organizational capacity building or sustainability building or that kind of thing. And then you're being very transparent that what we are looking for
Yes.
is funds to hire a grant writer so that we are able to build our program. But in general, the practice is not to include specific fees for a grant writer within your budget. Although sometimes it can, this is where it gets a little bit, you can sometimes do it as part of your administrative fee.
Yeah. So let me just
But
chip in here. There are professional grant writers all over, and I'm sure in Lome, Edward, there's professional grant writers that you can find. What you want is somebody who can dedicate time, understand your
Yes.
mission, is good at writing. What you can't do, and it used to be that you could do this, you could say, if you get this grant, we will give you a commission of the grant. That's what they don't want to see anymore.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
like,
Okay.
DML pays Abby, but it's not based on any condition that she will get X number of grants. It's just, we know the
Okay.
risk is there.
Okay.
So you can find your own people that are good at writing and are able to do that. Like Abby said, she can help for the first one. But I don't know that, I mean, what her rate is going to be a US rate as compared to what your rate might be in other countries where the standard of living is lower. So just to point that out. Apostle Emmanuel, you were trying to go ahead. You want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not hearing you again. All right, Lazarus, go ahead.
All right, thank you for this opportunity. And Abigail, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's really a great one. My question is, can you help me share more idea on what are some key things grant reviewers look for in a proposal so that I can take note of it and give more attention to it while writing grant. Thank you.
So I'm just going to interrupt there for just a second. So
Yeah.
if we send you the
Go ahead.
last video that we did, that Abby did of the presentation, you will see that summarized in both the last one as well as some of the earlier ones that you might have missed, Lazarus. So we will be
Alright.
resending
Sorry,
that
I
again.
missed last week. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were invited, we will be sending the information out. If you were invited and we don't have your contact details, go back to the person that invited you. And we will be sending it to them and they can forward it to you as well to make sure you have all that information. All right, we want to be
Thank you
sensitive
so
to
much.
time. Some of us have been on through the prayer call and through now, and we have other meetings coming up. So Abby, thank you so much. It is a gift. We appreciate how you use your time and your talent to be a blessing to DML and to all these teams. You know, what you get in a grant is a lot more than what you get from an individual donor, but that's not to say that it doesn't take as much work. You know, we might apply for 100 grants and get one. You just don't know. And so all of raising support is time, and it is time is money. But you know, we're just trying to see where God might be opening doors, and we won't know unless we don't knock and ask. I'm
Yep.
going to ask Abby, would you close us in prayer and maybe pray for these teams as they go about figuring
Yes.
out how to do this work? That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Father God, we just thank you for this opportunity to gather together and to represent so many nations and communities all at once, and to remember that it is your call and your mission that we are all on together. It's such a gift. Father, I ask especially for these leaders as they are taking in a lot of information. It can feel so overwhelming to hear so much new information at once, and to look once again at the mountain that you have set in front of us. But Father, I pray that instead of feeling overwhelmed or hopeless or fearful, you would just give each of us courage to face the work that you've set in front of us, and to know that you are going to walk with us as we tackle everything that's ahead. So I praise you and thank you again for the work that is happening in all of these different countries and communities through these leaders and the work that they are a part of. Thank you, and we just praise you. Amen.
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 All right. Thank you
Amen.
all so much. God bless you. I will send out the video, as well as Abby will help with all the handouts. We'll get those out to you as soon as possible. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
you.
Mhm.
Mhm.